Wide tires don't feel faster and they never will. Don't trust your feelings. They're wrong. What is the fastest gravel tire size? Or perhaps we should be looking outside the category of gravel tires to find the fastest tire for riding on gravel. That's a little something we like to call foreshadowing. If you've been following US professional gravel racing, then you know that gravel tires have rapidly been increasing in size to the point that some of the fastest riders are now opting for mountain bike tires instead of gravel tires for gravel racing because they believe they are faster. Yes, you heard that correctly. But Dylan, surely a fat-ass mountain bike tire with big knobs on it has to be slower than a smooth, skinny gravel tire, right? I wouldn't be too sure about that. Today I put tires to the test on Silverstone's pedaling efficiency rig to try to get a better idea of what the optimal size tire is for both road and gravel, as well as talk about some of the previous testing I've done and give some explanations for the arguably surprising results you are about to see. Be forewarned, there is a lot of nuance in this video. There will not be a straightforward answer because riding your bike on gravel is not straightforward. I do my best to cover all of it, and if you do manage to suffer through all the way to the end, then I promise you, you will leave this video with a much better idea of what the optimal tire for gravel racing and riding should look like. Welcome back to the channel. This video is fueled by the feed. Gravel tires. For those of you who haven't had the pleasure of attending a gravel race yet, then you may be unaware of just how heated this conversation can get. There is no conversation that you will hear more at a gravel race than what tires you run in, and for whatever reason, people do love to pick their favorite gravel tire size and be a dick about it.
I think this trend that everyone is going towards mountain bike tires is wrong. I think it's based on poor decisions and poor communication of science and poor testing.
It's always this fight between traction but also rolling resistance where like the climbs are going to make such a difference.
I don't think I would ever go past a 45. And I've raced a 45 once this year.
If you also don't want to finish your next 3 races, get the Bontragers. Yeah, guys, everyone, I'm going back to the Pathfinder. The Conti Race King 2.2 Black Chili Compound is a terrible tire. Don't buy it. I don't recommend it anymore. Stop buying it. Okay, yes, I'm not immune to this. In fact, if there's anybody who's guilty of shoving their favorite gravel tire size in people's faces, then it's probably me. But, you know, that's just because everyone else is wrong. So, is everybody who beat you at that last gravel race you did also wrong, or are you just that weak? In all seriousness, I do want to do my best to stay objective here because at the end of the day, I care more about going fast than I do about being right. I know, shocker. If wider tires or mountain bike tires are in fact slower for gravel racing, I do not have a problem admitting that I've been wrong and switching back. But I will say that I didn't start using mountain bike tires for gravel racing for no reason. A lot of real-world testing went into that decision. That being said, I'm also well aware that real-world testing is not always the most scientific. There are simply some variables that you cannot control for, like shifts in wind, which, as I've come to learn, can absolutely wreak havoc on a tire test. So when my kit sponsor Rule 28 brought me over to Silverstone to do some wind tunnel testing and asked if I wanted to do a session on their pedaling efficiency rig as well, I jumped at the opportunity. And while there are endless things that I'd love to test on this thing, with just one session available, there was no question what I was going to test first. Tires. And by the way, shout out to Rule 28. They make kit. Nothing they make has anything to do with tires, but they just have a genuine passion for making people faster, which is why they wanted to help me with this project. If you're in the market for some aero kit, be sure to check out what they have to offer. Link down in the description below. Most people are probably unfamiliar with this pedaling efficiency rig, so let me give a quick rundown of how it works before I get into the results that I found. The bike is put on the rig and the rear wheel spins a 2-meter diameter drum. Rider input power is measured using Body Rocket power meter pedals, which measures power at 100 Hertz, a much higher frequency than the typical pedal-based power meter. Output power at the roller is measured as well, and by taking the difference of the two, we can get the efficiency of the system. For example, if a rider input power is 300 watts and the roller output power is measured at 270 watts, the power loss is 30 watts and thus 90% efficient. There are many factors that contribute to efficiency, like your drivetrain, your frame, even different riders that weigh the same amount doing the same power output have been found to be more or less efficient. Of course, today we are keeping all of those variables constant because what we care about is the efficiency loss from the tires. With the rig, we were able to test two different riding surfaces, pavement and cobbles. Unfortunately, they don't have a gravel surface yet. I told them that they should add one, but for now, cobbles will have to do for approximating a gravel surface. And yes, I know there will be some comments saying cobbles are actually much rougher than gravel, and the gravel that I ride is so smooth you could practically ride a road bike on it. Look, gravel comes in all shapes and sizes. There is gravel that is rougher than cobbles, and there is gravel that is so smooth it might as well be pavement, which is why we tested both surfaces, so we could get a clearer picture, and I will be discussing all the nuances after I go over the results. Alright, one last thing before I get into the results. I want to go over some of the assumptions that I made along the way just to be fully transparent. First, the gravel tire that we're testing today is the Pirelli Cincherato, which in my mind is pretty representative of your average gravel race tire, and it comes in every size from 35mm to 50mm in 5mm increments, and we test all of them. Finally, we test my favorite tire from last year, the Conti Race King 2.2 mountain bike tire. And these are the exact tires that Silka and I tested in the wind tunnel last spring. This video is in no way sponsored by any tire company, so I am free to say whatever I want about the findings. Next, the pedaling efficiency rig obviously only measures losses from the rear tire, not the front and rear combined like in the real world. So I asked Silverstone what would be the best way to approximate the losses from the front tire, and they said that just doubling the wattage loss should be close enough. Yes, the losses will be slightly higher for the rear tire because there is more weight on it, but it should be pretty close, especially in an aggressive position. For example, Silka estimates the weight distribution to be 48 and 52% for a road bike position, which I would say is how I have my gravel race bike set up. This brings me to tire pressure. I would have loved to have tested different tire pressures on the pedaling efficiency rig as well, but we simply didn't have time for that. But obviously you can't just use the same pressure across vastly different tire sizes and different surfaces, so what we did was use Silka's professional tire pressure calculator and use the optimal pressure for each given size and surface. So yes, we did change the pressure for the paved test and the cobbled test, which I know is something that you would not actually do in a race, but we wanted to give each tire the opportunity to perform as optimally as possible. Another test where we don't change pressure would be amazing, and believe me, the list of things that I want to test on this rig is practically endless. To make switching tires easier between tests, we tested using tubes instead of tubeless, until we got to the mountain bike tire and our tube got a puncture, which forced us to test it tubeless. This is not ideal because tubes add rolling resistance, so I did my best to account for this in my calculations. I used this data from bicyclerollingresistance.com about how much resistance is added by going from tubeless to butyl tubes. If anything, this will probably be an overestimation because bicycle rolling resistance uses a smaller drum which deforms the tire more, which inflates, no pun intended, the wattage difference between various tests. I did ask Silverstone about this, and they are pretty confident that their drum is big enough to be close to real-world values, but you should keep in mind that there are a lot more variables in the real world, so oftentimes the savings derived from, say, the wind tunnel or this pedaling efficiency rig are seen as the absolute best case scenario, and the savings may not be as dramatic out on the road. Finally, I will also be including aero data, and this data comes from the testing that Silka and I personally did in combination with some of the work that Swiss Side has done on how gravel tire size affects aerodynamics. Using these data points, I came up with an approximation for the aero drag of using different size tires, and I include that in my final calculation because aerodynamics is something that can't be ignored when trying to determine what the fastest gravel tire size is. So, is this test perfect? Not by any means. Are the assumptions that I made perfect? No, they are not. And despite me saying this, there will be comments pointing all of this out to me, even though I am well aware, which is fine. Apparently it helps with the YouTube algorithm. So that was a lot of buildup, but let's get to what you all came here to see, which is the test results. I'm going to be giving you the results for the two speeds that we tested on the rig, which were 36 kilometers per hour or 22 miles per hour, which just so happens to be the winning average speed of last year's Unbound 200. And then 40 kilometers per hour, which is nearly 25 miles per hour, which is a faster average speed than you will see for pretty much any gravel race, even if you're a pro, but it will give you an idea of how speed affects this whole equation, because, spoiler alert, it does quite a bit. Starting with 36 kilometers per hour, let's get the aero losses out of the way first. The 35mm is unsurprisingly the most aero tire, so it is our benchmark and therefore has a 0 watt penalty. When we move up to the 40, we now have to put out 3.5 more watts to maintain the same speed. 6.7 watts for the 45, 9 watts for the 50, and then 8 watts for the Conti Race King 55mm mountain bike tire. Hold on, Dylan. Are you trying to pull one over on us? Why is the mountain bike tire faster than the 50? That doesn't make any sense. Counterintuitive, I know, but this is actually what we found in the wind tunnel with these exact same tires. Personally, I think it could have something to do with the pattern on the sidewall, which is giving the tire a bit of a golf ball effect, but that's just a theory. Regardless, these are the actual results that we found, so I'm going with it. Moving on, let's do the rolling resistance losses on pavement and then add the two up so we can get our total losses on pavement. Again, the 35 was the fastest on pavement, so that's our benchmark, and then going from there, we have a 12 watt penalty for the 40s, 21 for the 45s, 25 for the 50s, and 32.6 for the mountain bike tires. This gives us a net penalty of 0 watts for the 35s, 15.5 for the 40s, 27.7 for the 45s, 34 for the 50s, and 40.6 for the mountain bike tires. This probably doesn't come as a surprise to most people, but it was genuinely a surprise for me because after some of the testing I've done where wider tires seem to perform so well on gravel, I thought that they would perform better even on pavement. Before we go down any rabbit holes about what this means for tire selection though, let me get through the rest of the results and then I promise I'll break this down from every angle, probably more than what a lot of you asked for. Alright, next we have the cobbles at 36 kilometers per hour, and I will be adding in the aero losses to get the net penalty. So spoiler alert, the 35 was not the fastest, so it will not be getting a 0 again, but I'm gonna start with it and work down from there. The 35 was actually the slowest with a 41.8 watt penalty. The 40 was a 29 watt penalty, 21 watts for the 45, and then the 50 actually gets slower than the 45 with a 23.2 watt penalty, so it was looking like maybe 45 was the optimal size until we get to the mountain bike tire, and then bam, 0 watt penalty because it is the fastest tire of the bunch. This gives us a net penalty on the cobbles of 41.8 watts for the 35, 32.5 for the 40, 27.7 for the 45, 32.2 for the 50, and finally just 8 watts for the mountain bike tire. This means that for the difference between the 35 and the mountain bike tire, which were the fastest on the pavement and cobbles respectively, we have a 40.6 watt advantage to the 35s on pavement and a 33.8 watt advantage to the mountain bike tires on cobbles. Yeah, things are starting to get very interesting here to say the least. Let's do the same test with 40 kilometers per hour, and this time I'll go through it a bit faster so we can just get to the discussion already. Dude, why do you think anybody cares about your discussion? The only reason I even clicked on this is because I can't get the 30-second version with no added fluff in it on TikTok anymore. Oh, never mind, it's back. For aero penalty, we have 0 watts for the 35, 8.8 watts for the 40, 16.8 for the 45, 22.4 for the 50, and 20.3 for the mountain bike tire. For the rolling resistance penalty on pavement, we have 0, 16, 24.4, 29.2, and 38, giving us a net penalty of 0, 24.8, 41.2, 51.6, and 58.3. For the rolling resistance penalty on cobbles, we have 33.6, 19.4, 16.6, 23.6, and then 0. Yes, the 50 millimeter tire didn't perform as well at 40 kilometers per hour for some reason. This gives us a net penalty on cobbles of 33.6, 28.2, 33.4, 46, and 20.3. Interesting to note here, when taking into account the aero, the 50 actually performed the worst here, and the mountain bike tire again performed the best. But just for consistency's sake, I'm going to compare the 35 to the mountain bike tire just like I did in the first test. On pavement, you are giving up 58.3 watts by going from the 35 to the mountain bike tire, and on cobbles, the advantage swings in favor of the mountain bike tire by 13.3 watts. So as we can see, the higher the speed, the less favorable the mountain bike tire is on cobbles, with a 33.8 watt advantage at 36 kilometers per hour and just a 13.3 watt advantage at 40 kilometers per hour. Now I do know that these are higher speeds than most people ride and race gravel at, and what this means is that at slower speeds it actually only makes more sense to run bigger tires because there will be an even bigger advantage. This also means that on a course with a lot of climbing in it, it makes more sense to run a mountain bike tire. I know a lot of people are worried about the added weight of using a mountain bike tire, but let me squash that notion for you right now. The Pirelli Centenario in the 35 millimeter width that we tested here has a claimed weight of 410 grams. The Conti Race King 2.2 has a claimed weight of 605 grams. When you take into account both tires, that's a difference of 390 grams, and assuming we run more sealant in the mountain bike tire, let's just call it 450 grams, which is basically a 1 pound difference for my American viewers. That is more extra weight from sealant than you would probably actually have, but I want to be generous to the 35 here. With that extra weight, if you were a 70 kilogram rider putting out 300 watts up a 10% grade, you would have to do roughly an extra 2 watts to maintain the same speed. It is at this point that I'd like to remind you that for rolling resistance losses, we are looking at differences in the tens of watts, a full order of magnitude greater. So yes, weight should be your last concern for the vast majority of races. Most of the time, you want to address aero and rolling resistance before you start concerning yourself with weight. So I had to get the weight debate out of the way right off the bat, or else the weight weenies were going to have an aneurysm. But now let's get to the good stuff and start discussing aero and rolling resistance and how these factors should affect your tire choice. First things first, there is a sizable penalty to running bigger tires on pavement. If anything, this probably proved that I should have been testing on pavement all along, because almost every single gravel race has at least some pavement in it. This does make the tire discussion more complicated, because the fastest tire for one section of the course may be the slowest tire for another section of the course, and vice versa. There are certain races like Unbound or Big Sugar where the call is still pretty obvious. The vast majority of the course is gravel, and rough gravel at that, and the few road sections that there are pretty inconsequential, other than maybe the sprint finish at the end. But if you're putting out significantly more watts for the entire 5 to 10 hour race, you will probably be less fresh for that sprint anyway, if you even make it there without getting dropped or flatting out your skinny tires in the first place. Knowing this now, I can think of at least one race that I did last year where I got this calculation very wrong, and I'm going to use it as an example where I would go with a narrower tire in the future. The BWR North Carolina race is 70% road despite being classified as a gravel race. and that race has some significant paved climbs, and the point in the race where I got dropped was one of those paved climbs. Looking back on it, mountain bike tires were definitely not the right call, and I probably should have opted for 40s or 45s. Ultimately, factors you're going to have to consider are what percentage of the course is road and how consequential are those road sections. Are they sections where you're just sitting up and taking a breather, maybe refueling, or are they sections where the race is very much on? And if you don't have an optimal bike setup, you will be losing a lot of time or wasting a lot of energy. And then of course there's your own strengths and weaknesses. Let's say for example you excel on the off-road sections compared to your competition, and maybe you want a bike that's optimized for those sections so you can drop your competition there. Or maybe you have the opposite strategy and you know you can make it through those sections on a suboptimal bike, so you want a more optimal bike for the sections that you do struggle with, which might be the paved sections. This is the kind of stuff that seasoned gravel racers already took into account, but it is good to have a test that confirms that there is no best of both worlds tire, there is only trade-offs. Okay, now I want to talk about the optimal tire for actually riding on gravel. So we're going to mainly be looking at the cobbled test for this one. Is this cobbled surface too rough? Well, maybe.
The 35 with the cobbles felt like one of those massage guns on my ass.
But gravel does come in all shapes and sizes. I will grant you that more testing needs to be done on different roughnesses of gravel, but I have done a lot of real-world testing myself, and I've consistently come to the conclusion that a lightweight cross-country mountain bike tire is the fastest option for riding on gravel, even when that gravel isn't particularly rough. And I do want to reiterate that I am not the only US pro gravel racer who has done this testing and come to this conclusion. A number of very notable racers with much better results than me have been finding the exact same thing and winning gravel races on mountain bike tires over the last season. I've been hesitant to make a video about the real world testing that I do because, to be honest, it's not the most scientific. It's very much the kind of testing that you'd find on a typical GCN video, if you know what I mean. And look, there's nothing wrong with that. It's a lot better than what most people do, which is just ride and see if the tire feels faster. Insert a massive eye roll anytime somebody says that to me, but more on that in just a minute. At least in the video that GCN will inevitably make about this exact same topic 6 months from now, they won't judge me. I just want the data that I'm putting out on this channel to be more controlled and higher quality. So all that to say, yes, the pedaling efficiency rig test wasn't perfect, and yes, outdoor testing isn't perfect, but they do have somewhat opposite upsides and downsides, and at the very least, both of them come to the exact same conclusion, which only strengthens my confidence that a mountain bike tire is actually the fastest tire for riding on gravel. Now, if I hadn't tested the mountain bike tire, we would be coming away from this video with the conclusion that the 45 is the optimal tire size and 50 is too big. And critics will say, Dylan, you idiot, the mountain bike tire you tested is a different brand and model. You can't compare apples to oranges. But that's actually precisely the point, and let me explain why. Lightweight cross-country mountain bike tires are faster for a very specific reason, and that reason is because they can get away with using a thinner casing without increasing the puncture risk because the tire is so much wider, and also it could be the case that the knobs actually help protect the casing. Tires with a thinner casing will generally have a lower rolling resistance than tires with a thicker casing. The reason why the 45 is the fastest out of the gravel tires is because the casing thickness across the gravel tires isn't changing, or at the very least, it's not changing enough. The thickness of the casing on the 35 is pretty close to the thickness of the 50, and if you want wide tires to get faster, the casing needs to get thinner as they get wider, and this is the biggest problem that I see with current gravel tires. It's not enough to just ride a wide gravel tire. As we've seen, that may actually be slower. You need to make the full jump to a lightweight cross-country mountain bike tire with a thin casing to get the rolling resistance benefits that I'm talking about. All right, Dylan, I hear you and I see this data, but wide tires and mountain bike tires, they just feel slow. How do you explain that if they're not? Bro, why do you keep talking to yourself in the third person? It's just weird. This is important, and I want to get this through every viewer's head. A wider tire will always feel slower than a narrower tire because you are feeling more vibrations, and our brain interprets vibrations as speed. In reality, those vibrations are slowing you down. Every time you feel vibration, energy is being wasted as the bike goes up and down as opposed to forward. Not feeling the vibration is actually a good thing, even if it doesn't feel faster. It's kind of like driving down the highway at 100 miles per hour in some old car versus a nice new luxury car. In the old car, 100 miles per hour is going to feel really freaking fast to the point that it's almost scary. In a nice new luxury car, 100 miles per hour might as well feel like 40 miles per hour because the ride is so smooth. The same sensation happens when you ride a bike with wide tires, and this is the reason why wide tires are so slow to catch on in every discipline of cycling. Wide tires don't feel faster, and they never will. Don't trust your feelings. They're wrong. So some of you may be asking, why not just put this thin casing on a narrower tire and have the best of both worlds? I encourage you to try that and then report back how far you made it before you got a puncture. Flat tires are currently a major issue in gravel racing. Gravel racers have more flat issues than mountain bike racers who race on worse terrain, which in my opinion is unacceptable. The narrow tire needs to be thicker to survive the race, and oftentimes it still doesn't survive the race. This is one of the biggest benefits to using mountain bike tires. You get incredibly low rolling resistance and at the same time, incredibly low puncture risk. Earlier in this video, I said there is no best of both worlds, but I take that back. This is a scenario where it is the best of both worlds. And finally, mountain bike tires simply corner better, handle better, are more comfortable, and cause less full body fatigue over a long race. I really hope that none of those points need further explanation. If you ride a mountain bike, then you already know exactly what I'm talking about. So is the tire selection question straightforward? Well, it depends on the course, so no, it's not. You will still have to have this discussion every time you go to a gravel race, unfortunately. And yes, somewhat surprisingly, for certain gravel courses, you probably shouldn't even be looking in the gravel tire category. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in coaching or online training plans, check the link down in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with your cycling friends. I'll see you in the next one.